Hi drummers, hope you're well. I'm going to talk a little bit here about bass drum speed and how to develop it from my perspective. The book I'm going to talk about here is the Gary Chaffee book, Time Functioning Patterns. I think this is an absolutely brilliant resource. When I think back to over the years like developing my bass drum, this is the thing I've used the most. This is the resource I've used the most. I think it's absolutely superb and can't recommend it enough. I'm just going to talk about the very beginning really. These are the so-called Fatback Exercises on page 11, and just going to have a play through these, a quick discuss of them. Loads of my students want to use this book and they like the idea of it, and sometimes the reading is a bit confusing, sometimes the actual concept of how it all works is a bit confusing, so I just wanted to talk through it. There is a CD that comes with the book, but the CD doesn't play all of the examples, so I just wanted to sort of do that really, because that's the thing we end up doing in our sessions here most often, so I wanted to sort of make that available to everybody. We're talking about page 11 here, as I say, the Fatback Exercises. These ones and the ones in the subsequent sort of 2-3 pages where it says combinations of bass drum figures, I think are absolutely solid gold, and you can't go wrong with these in terms of building up that bass drum speed. The basic idea is they're all little exercises 2 beats long, so you play them twice to make 1 bar of music, and the notes below the line of the kick drum, the notes above the line of the snare drum, and the reason there isn't a hi-hat or ride cymbal part written is that you can do different ostinatos. So at first you play straight 8th notes, but then you could do 16th notes, you could do 1 and a 2 and a, you could do 1 and 2 and, developing all of that, so it's not just about kick drum, far from it. In fact, there's loads of other awesome things in the book after this as well. It's not just about kick drum, it's about developing a time feel and ability to coordinate different things and feeding your creativity. That's why it's such a brilliant book. It has all these lovely sort of facets to it. But this specifically at first is going to be just about getting this kick drum going, and I would say stick with a straight 8th note pulse at first when you're first developing this. The basic idea is at first you'd get the bass drum and you'd move it, one single bass drum, move it into all 4 of the positions that you can play within 1 beat. So if you're into 16th notes, 1 E and A, play it on the 1, play it on the E, play it on the and, play it on the A. Then exercises 5 through to exercise 10, you've got 2 kick drums, combinations of 2 kick drums, and then 11 through to 14, 3 kick drums, and finally 15 is 4 kick drums. And we'll stop yabbering and get on with playing, man. So first one here, crotchet beats, quarter notes, 1 on the kick, 1 on the snare, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So straight 8s on the hi-hat, and then just playing through kick and snare in that manner. Now on number 2, we have a semi-quaver or 16th note rest on the first beat, and then the little bass drum there will come in on the E. If you're playing straight 8s on the hi-hat, that's going to go in between the hi-hats on 1 and 1 and 2 and 3. Hopefully that's making a bit of sense. Number 3 is on the and. You've got a quaver or 8th note rest on the first beat, then the bass drum comes in on and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So in sync with the hi-hat on the and of beat 1 or the and of beat 3. Number 4 here, the bass drum is on the A, 1 E and A, the 4th semiquaver in a group of 4, just before beat 2. The snare drum here is always beat 2, by the way, and beat 4. Hence the name Fatback. Fatback would be a big hit on the snare, beat 2 and beat 4. So number 4, and 2, 3, 1, 3. Hopefully this is all making a bit of sense. I'll recap. Number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Now 5, as I said earlier, through to 10 is 2 kicks. On number 5, we've got 1 E, the first 2 semi-quavers there of the bar. If you're playing with the 8th notes on the hi-hat, again, the first of these kicks will be with the hi-hat in sync with it. The second will be in the gap between 1 and 1 and 2. And number 6 is straight quavers or 8th notes, 1 and, directly in sync with the hi-hat. Number 7 is 1 and then A, so the position that we saw back in number 4, the first and the last of 4 semiquavers, 1 E and A. So 1 E and 2 and First one in sync with the hi-hat, the second one in the gap just before the snare drum hits. Number 8, semi-quaver or 16th note rest, 2 semi-quavers, then another 16th or semi-quaver rest. So this is going to be on E and, 1 E and 1 The first of those will be in the gap between the hi-hats. The second one will be in sync with and. 1 and 2 and. Number 9, these are what we call upbeat semiquavers on the E and the in between the hi-hats. Number 10, quaver or 8th note rest followed by 2 semiquavers. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. With the hi-hat, this is going to be the first of the kicks in sync with the second hi-hat hit, and then the bass drum in the gap before the snare. Number 11 now through to 14 is 3 semiquavers. This first phrase is 1 E and, 2 semiquavers, 1 quaver. The first one is going to be in sync with the hi-hat, the second bass drum is going to be in the gap between, the third bass drum is going to be back in sync with the hi-hat. Number 12 is 1 E so semi-quaver, quaver, semi-quaver. The first one is going to be in sync with the hi-hat, as you'd expect. The second one is going to be in the gap. The hi-hat on and is going to be on its own. The bass drum will come in on just before the snare on beat 2. Number 13 is the phrase 1 and a quaver, then 2 semiquavers. First kick is going to be in sync with the hi-hat. Then the second one will also be in sync with the hi-hat, and the little extra one will be in the gap before beat 2. Number 14 here is semiquaver or 16th note rest on beat 1, and then E and 3 semiquavers in a row. The first hi-hat will be on its own, then there's a kick in the gap, then there's a kick with the second hi-hat, then there's a kick on its own before the snare. And then number 15 is all 4 semiquavers in beat 1, so 1 E and 2 on the snare. And the first kick will be with the hi-hat, then one in the gap, then the third kick will be with the hi-hat, one in the gap. So what I'll do finally here is play through the whole lot from the top, nice steady speed. I'll do 4 repeats of each. Just quickly about bass drum technique, I'm using here the heel up technique, so bouncing on the ball of your foot. It's very easy on YouTube and elsewhere to get into a real rabbit hole with bass drum technique. Heel down, so your heel just on the resting on the ground, is absolutely fine as well, not knocking that at all. But personally, I find that more difficult to get a really nice solid volume and projection with it. I've never quite gone as fast with it either. Then again, I haven't practiced it as much, so not knocking heel down at all. Heel up for me works great. There's other techniques knocking around. Slide, which is basically heel up, but you're sort of sliding up the pedal as you go. Also heel toe, which I've never really got into much, but not knocking any of those techniques. I think the best bit of advice I could give after all this time is with technique, just basically pick one and go with it, man, because it's so easy to get, as I say, into a rabbit hole discussing this technique versus that technique, and I feel like sooner or later all of that time spent discussing it could be probably better spent sitting at a kit, whacking out some bass drums, just building up your speed, man. So I like to keep it simple. Heel up technique, bouncing on the ball of your foot, and just firing them out, man. That's the thing. Right, here we go. From the top, number 1, I'll do 4 repeats of each. 1, 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number Number 6. Number 7. Number 8. Number 9. Number 10. Number 11. Number 12. Number 13. Hope this is all making a bit of sense, and let me know if you've got any questions. Again, can't recommend this book highly enough. There won't be like a PDF or anything with this video, just because I just think this book is awesome. Go for it, man. Grab hold of that and go nuts. If you've got any questions about that, any questions at all, give me a shout. I just think it's a brilliant way to build up your bass drum technique. Like it says in the book, it's not just about building technique. Once you've got those happening, it's really just going to be a short sort of 3, 4, 5 minutes blasting through those, maybe like each day or each practice session if you can. And then the other thing is, it talks a lot about, this is creativity or inspiration for improvising. So when you're done playing through them, close the book, have a play, see if you can put them together. Especially as you do this, repetitively a few times, you'll start to get some of these ideas, some of these phrases, just sort of by osmosis coming across into your playing. Jam, man, do some playing, and you'll see these things come across. I think this is really good. One of the things, another thing that drummers who come in often say to me is they're a bit stuck in a rut, or I sort of can't think of anything to play. Often when I come to be creative or improvise, I can't necessarily think of things to play. And I always think, just like, this is a bit of a cliche really, but just like in real life, if you want to be somebody interesting, then you need to take in interesting information. You need to read interesting books. You need to meet other interesting people, travel to interesting places, listen to interesting music. And then when it's time to sort of have a conversation with somebody or be creative in any way, you've got inspiration, you've got sort of stuff you can draw on. And I think in music, just what works for me is doing exactly the same thing, exposing your brain to all these sort of possibilities, all these cool ideas. And then when it's time to be creative, again, you've got stuff to draw on. Your brain can pick from certain things, and it's not always like super consciously. You're not always playing going, right, here comes a bit of number 8, here comes a bit of number 12. All these things, this is the awesome thing about having a human brain, like all these things can come together a bit more sort of organically, really. Often you don't really know where these things have come from, but one thing is, in my mind, really clear, is if you put in really good quality information like this, then your brain will sort of sort through it, and especially if you practice the improvising side of it, then you'll be able to come out with some really cool stuff. So play through the exercises, they are 1 to 15, and then just close the book, have a jam, and especially as you repeat that more and more, you'll find those ideas coming across into your playing. Hope it's all cool. Any questions, give us a shout. See you soon. Thanks a lot.